There is a room in your mind that no one else can see. It exists beyond the photographs on your social media feed, beyond the resume that lists your achievements, beyond the smile you wear when someone asks how you're doing. In this room, there is a chair, and sometimes, late at night, when the world finally goes quiet and there is nowhere left to run, you sit in that chair and feel it. Emptiness. Not the emptiness of lacking something, not hunger, not loneliness in the conventional sense, but a peculiar, gnawing absence at the center of everything you have built. A void that whispers a question you cannot answer. Is this all there is? From the outside, your life looks perfect. Perhaps you have the career you worked toward for years. Perhaps you have the relationship, the home, the security that others dream about. Perhaps you have checked every box on the list that society handed you, the list that promised, complete these tasks and you will be happy. But here you are, empty. And the worst part? You feel guilty for feeling empty, because you know there are people who would trade places with you in a heartbeat. You know you should be grateful. You tell yourself you are grateful. But gratitude doesn't fill the hole. It just makes the hole more confusing, more shameful, more impossible to talk about. So you don't talk about it. You smile. You post. You perform. You keep moving, because movement feels safer than stillness. Because in stillness, you can hear the echo of something missing, something that was never quite there to begin with. This is the great paradox of our age, the age of unprecedented comfort and unprecedented emptiness, the age where we have access to everything and feel connected to nothing, the age where we are more stimulated than ever before and more numb than we have ever been. Why? What has happened to us? Tonight, we embark on a journey into that question, not to find easy answers. There are none. But to understand the architecture of this emptiness, to trace its origins through the corridors of human consciousness, to name the shadow that follows us through our perfect lives. This is not a comfortable journey. It requires us to descend into places we usually avoid, to confront the mechanisms by which we have built prisons out of our own minds. But it is a necessary journey, because on the other side of this emptiness, should you choose to walk through it rather than around it, lies something ancient and true, something you have been searching for without knowing its name. Let us begin with a story. Imagine a man. Let's call him David. David is 42 years old. He is a successful architect living in a beautiful city. He has a loving partner, 2 healthy children, a house he designed himself. His career has flourished beyond his early ambitions. He travels for work, speaks at conferences, mentors. The therapist would nod and ask him questions, but the questions felt like they were searching for something that wasn't there, some trauma, some conflict, some obvious wound. But David's childhood was fine. His relationships are good. His health is good. There is no villain in his story, no clear source of pain. just emptiness. David is not alone. In fact, David is everywhere. He is in every major city, in every tax bracket, in every profession. Sometimes David is a woman named Sarah who worked her way to CEO and now sits in her corner office feeling like a fraud. Sometimes David is a young entrepreneur named Alex who sold his startup for millions and discovered that financial freedom feels suspiciously like a very expensive cage. Sometimes David is an artist, a doctor, a teacher, a parent who achieved the dream and found the dream hollow. This is not the emptiness of poverty or oppression, though those contain their own forms of suffering. This is something stranger and more insidious. This is the emptiness that comes from having everything and still feeling that the most essential thing is missing. The ancient Greeks had a word for this kind of suffering, acedia. The medieval monks called it the noonday demon, a spiritual torpor, a listlessness of the soul that arrived not in the darkness, but in the harsh light of day. The existentialists called it angst, the anxiety that comes from confronting the groundlessness of existence. The Buddhists recognized it as dukkha, the fundamental unsatisfactoriness that permeates even pleasant experiences. Every wisdom tradition has encountered this emptiness. Every contemplative lineage has mapped its territory. And yet, in our modern world, we have somehow convinced ourselves that this experience is a personal failing, a chemical imbalance, a problem to be solved with the right purchase, the right achievement, the right adjustment to our external circumstances. We have made emptiness an emergency when it might actually be an invitation. But an invitation to what? That is the question that will guide us tonight. To answer it, we must first understand how we arrived here. We must excavate the foundations of the self that feels empty, trace the historical and psychological forces that constructed the modern identity, understand the neuroscience of meaning-making and the philosophy of authenticity. We must descend into the gap between who we pretend to be and who we actually are. We must confront the persona, that mask Jung spoke of, the false self we polish and present to the world, and ask whether the emptiness we feel is actually the sound of our true self suffocating beneath it. This journey will take us through ancient temples and modern laboratories, through the writings of existential philosophers and the research of contemporary neuroscientists, through the dark night of the soul and the dawning recognition that emptiness might not be the enemy we thought it was. Consider this your warning. Once you truly see the mechanisms of your own emptiness, you cannot unsee them. Once you understand the architecture of the prison, you become responsible for whether you remain in it. Are you ready? Then let us descend. Let us go back to the beginning, to the origins of this peculiar human predicament, to the moment when we first began to mistake the map for the territory, the persona for the person, the achievement for the achievement of meaning. Let us explore why you feel empty. You learn to say I, and in that moment you create a boundary between yourself and everything else. You learn your name, and suddenly there is someone to name, a being distinct from mother, from world, from the flowing present moment. This is the birth of the ego, not ego in the popular sense of arrogance, but ego as the organizing principle of self-consciousness, the structure that says, I am this, not that. I exist here, separate from you, separate from the world. This is a miraculous development. It is what allows for individual thought, for planning, for the entire edifice of human civilization, but it comes with a cost. The cost is the beginning of anxiety. Because once you understand yourself as a separate being, you must also understand that this separate being is vulnerable. It can be hurt, it can be rejected, it can fail, and ultimately, it can die. The awareness of separation is inseparable from the awareness of mortality. The 20th century psychiatrist Ernest Becker built an entire theory around this insight. In his Pulitzer Prize-winning work, The Denial of Death, Becker argued that human civilization is essentially an elaborate defense mechanism against the terror of mortality. We create systems of meaning, religions, ideologies, cultural narratives that promise us some form of immortality, whether literal, heaven, or symbolic, legacy, fame, the immortality project of leaving our mark on the world. But there's something else that happens in childhood, something even more fundamental to the emptiness we're exploring. You learn very early that your authentic self is not entirely acceptable. Perhaps you cried and you were told to stop crying. Perhaps you expressed anger and you were punished. Perhaps you showed vulnerability and you were met with dismissal. Perhaps you simply felt the implicit pressure of your parents' expectations, their dreams for who you should become. And so you learned to adapt. You learned to create a version of yourself that would be loved, accepted, approved of. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear in social situations, the false self we present to the world. The persona is not inherently negative. We need some degree of social adaptation to function in the world. The problem arises when the persona becomes so thick, so convincing, that we forget it is a mask. We start to believe that we are the mask. We identify completely with this constructed self, this collection of learned behaviors and adopted values. Meanwhile, everything that doesn't fit the persona, all the messy, unacceptable, authentic parts of ourselves, gets pushed into what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is the unconscious repository of everything we have disowned about ourselves: our rage, our neediness, our perversions, our petty jealousies, our grandiose fantasies, our deep vulnerabilities. Now here is the crucial insight. The persona, no matter how well constructed, is fundamentally hollow. It is hollow because it is not actually you. It is a performance, a role, a strategic adaptation. And somewhere deep in your psyche, beneath all the layers of conditioning and social training, there is a part of you that knows this. There is a part of you that remembers the authentic self that was buried, the true face that lies beneath the mask. That part of you is the source of the emptiness. The emptiness is not random. It is not a chemical accident. It is a message from the depths, a signal that something essential has been lost, that the life you are living does not match the life you were meant to live, that the self you are presenting to the world is not the self that actually exists. But most of us never hear this message clearly. We feel the emptiness, but we misinterpret it. We think, I need more success, more validation, more stimulation, more pleasure. And so we pursue more, endlessly more, trying to fill the void with external things. This is where the modern world becomes complicit in our suffering. Consider the historical context. For most of human history, identity was not something you constructed. It was something given to you. You were born into a place, a community, a set of roles and expectations. You were the son of the blacksmith, so you became a blacksmith. You were born into a particular religious tradition, so you inherited that worldview. Your life had meaning, because it was embedded in a larger story that had been telling itself for generations. This was limiting, certainly. It constrained individual freedom and potential, but it provided something we have lost: a sense of place, of purpose, of belonging to something larger than yourself. The modern world offered a different bargain. It said, you are free. You can be anyone. You can go anywhere. You can create your own meaning. And this was, in many ways, a beautiful gift. The gift of self-determination, of possibility, of escape from rigid hierarchies and predetermined fates. But it came with a hidden cost. The cost was the loss of inherent meaning. Because if meaning is something you create rather than something you discover, then you are always responsible for creating it. And if you fail to create it, if your life feels empty, then you have only yourself to blame. The sociologist Emile Durkheim identified this phenomenon over a century ago. He called it anomie, a state of normlessness where traditional structures of meaning have broken down, but nothing has risen to replace them. Durkheim observed that suicide rates were highest not among the desperately poor, but among those who were suddenly freed from traditional constraints. Freedom without structure, he found, could be more devastating than oppression with meaning. And so we arrive at the contemporary predicament. We live in an age of unprecedented individual freedom. We can choose our careers, our partners, our beliefs, our identities. We can reinvent ourselves as many times as we like. We have access to infinite information, infinite possibilities, infinite paths, and yet we feel empty. Why? Because the freedom we have been given is primarily the freedom to consume. We are free to choose between product A and product B, between this career path and that one, between this identity and that one. But we are not free from the underlying system that turns everything, including our very selves, into commodities to be optimized and marketed. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the achievement society. Unlike the disciplinary societies of the past, which functioned through external coercion and prohibition, the achievement society operates through internalized demands to optimize, perform, and achieve. The master is no longer outside us, commanding us to obey. The master is inside us, commanding us to succeed. And here's the perverse twist. In the achievement society, we are simultaneously the master and the slave. We exploit ourselves in the name of self-realization. We push ourselves to burnout in pursuit of our dreams. We turn ourselves into human capital, into personal brands, into productivity machines. We become strangers to ourselves in the name of becoming our best selves. This is why the emptiness persists even when we achieve our goals. Because the goals themselves were never truly ours. They were imported, absorbed from the ambient culture, from Instagram feeds and TED Talks and motivational posters. They were the goals that looked meaningful from the outside, that seemed like they would finally answer the question, am I enough? But that question cannot be answered through achievement, because the question is not really about what you do. It is about who you are. And who you are has been buried under layer after layer of persona, strategy, performance, and optimization. The emptiness you feel is the absence of your true self. Let me take you deeper into the psychological mechanism. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has demonstrated that human consciousness is not a single unified thing. It is a hierarchy of processes, from basic awareness to complex self-reflection. At the bottom is what he calls the proto-self, the moment-to-moment representation of your body state. Above that is the core self, the fleeting sense of being here, now, experiencing this. And at the top is the autobiographical self, the narrative you tell about who you are across time. This autobiographical self is where things get interesting, because the story you tell about yourself, I am a successful person, I am a good parent, I am someone who has it all together, is just that, a story. It is a construction, a narrative cobbled together from selected memories, current identity commitments, and future projections. It is not you. It is a model of you, created by your mind to make sense of the chaos of experience. But we identify with this model completely. Every part of him that doesn't fit the story, his doubts, his fears, his strange longings, his unconventional desires, has been disowned, buried, forgotten. But the shadow does not disappear when it is ignored. It grows in the dark. It accumulates power. And eventually, it begins to make itself known through symptoms: depression, anxiety, addiction, psychosomatic illness, or emptiness. The emptiness is the shadow's way of saying, something is wrong. You are living a life that is not yours. You are wearing a face that is not your face. Come back. Come back to what is true. But coming back requires something most of us are terrified to do. It requires ego death. Not literally, of course, but symbolically. The death of the false self, the persona, the constructed identity that has been running the show. It requires descending into the territory that the persona was specifically designed to avoid: uncertainty, vulnerability, the groundless ground of being where there are no fixed identities, no permanent achievements, no guaranteed meanings. This is terrifying, because it feels like annihilation. It feels like you will die if you let go of the story, if you stop performing, if you allow yourself to be seen as you actually are, rather than as you wish to be. And in a sense, you're right. Something will die. The false self will die. And that is precisely what needs to happen for the emptiness to end. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can understand the process of death and rebirth, we must first descend more fully into the emptiness itself. We must map its territory, understand its mechanisms, feel its full weight. We must go into the darkness before we can find the light. Let us now descend into the heart of the emptiness. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a great chasm. On one side is the life you present to the world, the achievements, the roles, the identity you have carefully constructed. On the other side, barely visible in the darkness, is something nameless, something you have spent your entire adult life avoiding. The chasm between these two sides is the emptiness. It is not the absence of things. It is the presence of a split, a fragmentation within your own being. It is the distance between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. And the wider this distance grows, the more empty you feel. But what exactly widens this distance? What are the mechanisms, both internal and external, that deepen the chasm until it feels impossible to cross? Let us begin with the most obvious culprit, the hedonic treadmill. In the 1970s, psychologists Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell proposed a theory they called hedonic adaptation. The concept is simple but devastating. Humans quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness, regardless of positive or negative events. You get the promotion, you buy the house, you achieve the goal, and for a brief moment, you feel elevated. But then, almost inevitably, you adapt. The new baseline becomes normal, and you find yourself reaching for the next thing, convinced that this achievement, this acquisition, will be the one that finally brings lasting satisfaction. It never does. This is because the hedonic treadmill operates on a fundamental misunderstanding, the belief that happiness comes from external circumstances rather than internal states. As long as you are seeking fulfillment outside yourself, you are guaranteed to remain empty, because the very structure of seeking presupposes lack. You seek what you don't have, and the moment you acquire it, it loses its power to fulfill. The gap remains, but the hedonic treadmill is merely a symptom of something deeper. What truly hollows us out is the tyranny of comparison. You are not measuring your life against your own internal compass. You are measuring it against everyone else's highlight reel. You scroll through social media and see carefully curated images of other people's apparent happiness, success, adventure. You attend a reunion and hear about the accomplishments of former classmates. You see younger colleagues advancing faster than you did. You watch your friends getting married, having children, buying homes, and always, beneath the surface, the comparison machine in your mind is running its cruel algorithm. Am I ahead or behind? Am I winning or losing? Am I enough? The French philosopher René Girard identified this as mimetic desire. The idea that we don't really know what we want. Instead, we want what others want, or what we imagine others want. Our desires are borrowed, imitated, absorbed from the culture around us. And because everyone else's desires are equally borrowed, we all end up pursuing the same limited set of socially validated goals: wealth, status, beauty, recognition. This creates a double bind. On one hand, you feel compelled to achieve these goals because they represent success in the eyes of others. On the other hand, achieving them brings no real satisfaction because they were never authentically yours to begin with. They were implanted. And so you succeed, and you feel empty, and you don't understand why. Let's go deeper still, into the neuroscience. Your brain is a prediction machine. It creates models of reality and constantly updates them based on incoming information. This is how you navigate the world efficiently, through prediction rather than processing every sensation from scratch. But here's the problem. Your brain's prediction model includes a model of yourself, and this model is necessarily simplified, generalized, based on past patterns. It cannot accommodate the full complexity and fluidity of who you actually are moment to moment. When you identify completely with this simplified self-model, I am a successful person, I am a good parent, I am someone who doesn't fail, you create rigidity. You must defend this model against contradictory evidence. You must perform continuously to maintain it. Any experience that threatens this model triggers anxiety, shame, defensive reactions. This constant performance is exhausting, and more importantly, it's alienating. Because you are always living one step removed from direct experience, always filtering everything through the question, does this fit my self-image? The neuroscientist Sam Harris puts it this way: you are seeking yourself in your experience, rather than simply being your experience. You are always looking for the self, trying to shore it up, defend it, improve it. And this seeking creates a fundamental tension, a background hum of anxiety that prevents you from ever fully arriving in the present moment. This is why meditation practices across traditions emphasize the radical insight. There is no fixed, solid self to be found. When you look for it directly, it dissolves into processes, thoughts arising and passing, sensations coming and going, awareness itself being empty of any permanent identity. But we are not taught this. Instead, we are taught to build and fortify the self, to make it impressive, to make it invulnerable. And the modern world provides countless tools for this project. Consider the pharmaceutical approach to emptiness. The medicalization of suffering has produced a worldview where any deviation from optimal mood is treated as a disorder to be corrected. Feel anxious? Here's a pill. Feel depressed? Here's another pill. Can't focus? Here's a stimulant. Now, I am not dismissing the genuine value of psychiatric medication for those experiencing clinical disorders. Chemistry matters. Neurotransmitters matter. But we have created a culture where we reflexively reach for chemical solutions to what might be existential problems. What if your depression is not a malfunction, but a signal? What if your anxiety is not an enemy, but a messenger? What if the emptiness is not a void to be filled, but a truth to be confronted? The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, observed that the inmates who maintained their will to live were not those who were comfortable. No one was comfortable, but those who had a sense of meaning, a reason to endure. He concluded that human beings can bear almost any suffering if they can find meaning in it. Conversely, humans cannot bear even comfort if it is meaningless. This is the paradox David faces. His life is comfortable, safe, successful, and unbearable, because it lacks existential weight. It lacks authentic meaning. But where does meaning come from? This is where we must turn to the existentialists. Jean-Paul Sartre declared that existence precedes essence. You are thrown into existence without inherent purpose, without a predefined nature. You are, first and foremost, free. And this freedom is terrifying because it makes you completely responsible for creating your own meaning. Sartre called this the burden of radical freedom. You cannot blame God or fate or society for the emptiness of your life. You chose this life, even if you chose by not choosing, by following the default path, by doing what was expected. And you can choose differently. But here's where most people misunderstand existentialism. They think it's depressing, nihilistic. Actually, it's the opposite. Yes, there is no inherent meaning handed down from on high, but that means you are free to create meaning. And the way you create meaning is not through achieving external goals, but through authentic choice, through alignment between your actions and your deepest values. Albert Camus took this further. In the myth of Sisyphus, he uses the Greek myth of a man condemned to push a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down. This, Camus suggests, is the human condition. We labor, we strive, we build, and death erases it all. The universe is absurd, indifferent to our projects. And yet, Camus concludes, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because happiness is not found in achieving the goal. It's found in the choosing to engage with the task authentically, without illusion, without the need for external validation or permanent achievement. Sisyphus is happy because he owns his struggle. He embraces the absurdity. He finds meaning not in the outcome, but in the engagement itself. This is the key that most people miss. You feel empty, not because you haven't achieved enough, but because your achievements are disconnected from authentic engagement. You are going through the motions. You are performing success rather than living it. You are checking boxes on someone else's list, while your own deepest questions remain unasked. Let me give you a concrete example. Consider two people, both architects, like our David. The first architect designs buildings because it's a prestigious career, because it pays well, because it impresses people. He produces competent work. His buildings stand. But when he looks at them, he feels nothing. They are products, outputs, tokens of professional success. The second architect designs buildings because she is genuinely fascinated by the relationship between space and human experience. She obsesses over how light moves through a room, how materials age, how a building can create moments of unexpected beauty. Her buildings might be equally successful by external measures, but when she looks at them, she sees her questions made physical. She sees her authentic engagement made manifest. Both architects might earn the same income, receive similar recognition. But only the second one is actually alive in her work. Only the second one is operating from authentic choice rather than performing an adopted role. This is the difference between existential fullness and existential emptiness. Now you might object, but I do care about my work. I am engaged. And perhaps you are. But ask yourself honestly, are you engaged with the work itself, or with what the work represents? Are you fascinated by the process, or fixated on the outcome? Are you present in the activity, or always already thinking about how it will be received, what it will mean for your career, how it will reflect on your identity? This is a subtle but crucial distinction. The emptiness comes not from what you're doing, but from how you're relating to what you're doing. When you are constantly performing, constantly seeking validation, constantly measuring yourself against others, you are not actually there. You are dissociated from your own experience, watching yourself from the outside, judging yourself according to external criteria. This brings us to one of Jung's most profound insights. The persona is necessary, but it becomes pathological when it is mistaken for the self. You need a persona to function in the world. You cannot show up to a job interview as your raw, unfiltered self. Some degree of social adaptation is required. But the persona should be a tool you use consciously, not a prison you live in unconsciously. The problem is that most of us have completely identified with our personas. We have become our roles, the successful professional, the good parent, the together person. And we have exiled everything that doesn't fit this image into the shadow. The shadow, as Jung described it, contains not only our negative traits but also our unlived potential. It contains the parts of ourselves we disowned because they were inconvenient or threatening or socially unacceptable. The artist you might have been if you had chosen differently. The vulnerability you hide behind competence. The rage beneath your pleasant demeanor. The wildness beneath your control. And the shadow doesn't just sit quietly in the unconscious. It acts out. It sabotages. It manifests as mysterious symptoms, inexplicable moods, sudden compulsions. It projects itself onto others. You see in them the qualities you cannot acknowledge in yourself. Most relevantly, the shadow contributes to the emptiness. Because when you have disowned significant parts of yourself, you are quite literally not whole. You are fragmented. And you can feel this fragmentation as an absence, a hollowness, a sense that something essential is missing. Jung called the process of reintegrating the shadow individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness. But individuation is not a comfortable process. It requires confronting everything you have spent your life avoiding. It requires admitting that the person you present to the world is not the person you actually are. It requires, in other words, a kind of death. This is what the mystics across traditions have called the dark night of the soul. It is the phase of spiritual development where all previous certainties crumble, where God feels absent, where meaning evaporates, where the carefully constructed self reveals itself as an illusion. The 16th century Spanish mystic John of the Cross described this experience in painful detail. In the dark night, he wrote, the soul experiences profound desolation. Everything that once brought comfort, prayer, scripture, spiritual practice, becomes tasteless, meaningless. You are left in a void, stripped of all consolation, facing the groundlessness of existence. But John of the Cross insisted this was not a punishment, it was a purification. The dark night burns away false attachments, illusory identities, borrowed meanings. It is painful precisely because it is working, dissolving the false self to make room for authentic being. This is where David finds himself, in the dark night. At 3:47 a.m., lying in bed, feeling the weight of his perfect life pressing down like a stone. All his achievements have become tasteless. All his goals feel arbitrary. The story he has been telling about himself, the story of the successful, accomplished, together person, has collapsed. And he feels like he is dying. Because he is. The false self is dying. And until that death is complete, there can be no resurrection. Until the persona is consciously recognized as merely a tool rather than an identity, there can be no authentic self. Until the shadow is reintegrated, there can be no wholeness. This is the crisis. This is the descent. This is the conflict at the heart of the emptiness. You have built a beautiful life on the outside, while hollowing yourself out on the inside. You have achieved everything you thought you wanted, while losing everything you actually are. You have won the game, while forgetting what the game was supposed to be for. And now you stand at the edge of the chasm, looking down into the darkness, and you face a choice. You can turn away. You can double down on the performance, work harder to convince yourself and everyone else that you are fine, that your life is perfect. You can medicate the symptoms, distract yourself with pleasure, numb yourself with work or substances or constant stimulation. Many people choose this path. They spend their entire lives running from the emptiness, and they die never having truly lived, never having met themselves beneath the mask. Or you can descend. You can walk into the darkness. You can allow the false self to die. You can face the terror of uncertainty, the groundlessness of being, the possibility that everything you thought you knew about yourself is wrong. This is the hero's journey, not in the Hollywood sense of defeating external enemies and saving the world, but in the deeper, more ancient sense of descending into the underworld, confronting the monster, which is always ultimately yourself, and returning transformed. Joseph Campbell mapped this journey across mythologies. The hero receives a call to adventure. Initially they refuse, but eventually circumstances force them to cross the threshold into the unknown. They face trials, They descend to the lowest point, the belly of the whale, the crucifixion, the dark night. And there, in that place of maximum despair, they find the treasure, the elixir, the truth that transforms. But you cannot take shortcuts. You cannot skip the descent. The emptiness you feel is not a mistake. It is not a problem to be solved with better time management or a vision board or positive thinking. It is the call to adventure. It is your psyche saying, the life you are living is too small. The self you are presenting is not real. It is time to die and be reborn. This is terrifying, but it is also the only way through. Because the emptiness will not go away by adding more to your life. It will only go away by subtracting the false, by stripping away everything that is not essential, by allowing yourself to dissolve into the groundless ground of being and discovering what remains. And what remains when everything false has been burned away? That is the question we will answer in the next movement of this journey. But first, you must make the choice. Will you continue running? Or will you finally stop, turn around and face the darkness? Will you defend the false self until your dying day? Or will you allow it to die so that something true can emerge? David, lying in bed at 3:47 a.m., is approaching this moment. The moment where running is no longer possible, where the cognitive dissonance is too great, where the emptiness is too loud, where the false self can no longer maintain its grip. He doesn't know it yet, but he is on the threshold of awakening. And so are you. There is a moment in every transformation that cannot be described, only experienced. It is the moment when the false self finally exhausts itself, when the performance can no longer be sustained, when the mask cracks and falls away. For David, this moment comes not dramatically, but quietly. He is sitting in his home office on a Tuesday afternoon, reviewing blueprints for a project he doesn't care about. His partner calls up the stairs asking if he wants coffee. He opens his mouth to say yes, and instead, he begins to cry. Not the crying of grief or rage. Something else. Something that has been locked inside for so long, it has almost fossilized. He cries for 20 minutes, sitting at his desk, and he doesn't know why. His partner comes upstairs, concerned, and David tries to explain, but there's nothing to explain. I don't know who I am anymore, he says. I don't know if I ever did. This is the moment of confession, the moment when the truth can no longer be suppressed, the moment when David admits, first to himself and then to another, that he is lost. This confession is not weakness, it is the beginning of strength, because it takes tremendous courage to admit you don't know, to admit you have been performing rather than living, to admit that the life everyone envies feels hollow from the inside. The spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle describes a similar moment in his own life. At age 29, he was suicidally depressed. One night, the thought arose, I cannot live with myself any longer. And then, in a flash of insight, another question, who is the I that cannot live with myself? Who is the self? Are there two? This question short-circuited his entire self-system. He fell into a profound state of presence that lasted for months. He had stumbled, accidentally, upon the great insight of contemplative traditions. The self you think you are is a construction, and you are not that construction. You are the awareness in which the construction appears. Most of us don't experience this realization as dramatically as Tolle. For most of us, it comes more gradually, through crisis and questioning and the slow erosion of certainty. But it comes, and when it comes, everything changes. Let's understand what is actually happening psychologically during this transformation. The brain, as we discussed, operates on prediction. It has built a model of you, the I who is successful, competent, together. This model has been reinforced thousands of times through repetition, through social feedback, through the stories you tell about yourself. But when the model consistently fails to match experience, when you achieve success but feel empty, when you receive praise but feel fraudulent, when you look perfect on the outside but feel hollow on the inside, the brain enters a state of prediction error. Normally, the brain handles prediction errors by updating its model, but when the errors threaten a core belief, I am a successful person, the brain resists. It creates defenses. It rationalizes. It projects. It does anything to avoid updating the model. This is what psychologists call cognitive rigidity, and it is exhausting, because reality keeps contradicting the model, and you keep trying to force reality to fit the model rather than updating the model to fit reality. Eventually, if the contradiction is severe enough, something breaks. The old model collapses, and for a moment, a terrifying, liberating moment, there is no model at all. There is just raw experience, unfiltered by identity or interpretation. This is what Buddhists call no self or anatta. Not the absence of experience, but the absence of a fixed self having the experience. Just experience, arising and passing, moment by moment. Western psychology has a term for this too: ego dissolution. It can happen through meditation, through psychedelics, through extreme circumstances, or simply through the slow accumulation of contradictions until the whole edifice collapses. And it feels like dying, because from the perspective of the ego, it is dying. But here's the paradox. When the false self dies, what remains is not nothing. What remains is everything. What remains is the authentic self, not as a fixed identity, but as a fluid, responsive awareness that is no longer imprisoned by any particular story about itself. Jung called this process individuation, and he stressed that it is not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you always were beneath the persona. It's about reintegrating all the parts you disowned, welcoming back the shadow, acknowledging the full spectrum of your being. The philosopher Martin Heidegger approached this from another angle. He distinguished between inauthentic existence, living according to das Man, the they, following social scripts, doing what one does, and authentic existence, living in awareness of your radical freedom and mortality, making genuine choices rather than defaulting to social expectations. Authenticity, for Heidegger, requires confronting what he called being toward death, not in a morbid sense, but as a recognition that your time is finite, that you will die, and that this fact should inform how you live. When you truly internalize your mortality, your priorities clarify. The trivial falls away. What matters becomes obvious. This is what happens to David. In acknowledging his emptiness, in admitting his lostness, he has inadvertently opened a door. He has stopped performing long enough to ask genuine questions. What do I actually want? What do I actually value? What would I do if I weren't trying to impress anyone? These are terrifying questions because they have no clear answers. There is no manual for authentic living, no blueprint, no guarantee of success. But there is something else, something unexpected, relief. Because for the first time in years, David is not performing. He is simply being. He is sitting with his partner, admitting he doesn't have it all figured out, allowing himself to be seen in his confusion and vulnerability. And his partner doesn't leave, doesn't judge, simply says, I know, I've been empty too. This is the beginning of authentic connection. You see, the persona doesn't just isolate you from yourself, it isolates you from others. Because when you are always performing, always projecting a polished image, you never allow others to see you as you actually are, and therefore you never feel truly known. You can be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone. The research psychologist Brené Brown has spent decades studying vulnerability, shame, and authentic connection. Her central finding, true belonging, true connection, requires vulnerability. It requires letting others see you, not the curated version, but the actual you, with all your flaws and fears and uncertainties. This is counterintuitive. We think we need to be perfect to be loved. Actually, we need to be real. Because perfection is not relatable. Perfection is isolating. What connects us is our shared imperfection, our common struggle, our mutual confusion. When David confesses his emptiness, he gives his partner permission to do the same. They have their first real conversation in months, not about logistics or schedules or problems to solve, about the existential questions they've both been avoiding. Are we living the lives we want to live? Have we been sleepwalking through our own existence? This conversation doesn't solve anything, but it opens something, a space, a possibility. Now let's talk about what happens next, because this is where most spiritual and psychological teachings make a crucial error. They suggest that once you awaken, everything becomes blissful, that you transcend suffering, that you achieve some permanent state of enlightenment. This is nonsense. What actually happens is more subtle and more difficult. You don't transcend the human condition. You become more fully human. You don't escape suffering. You stop being at war with it. The Buddhist teacher, Pema Chodron, describes this beautifully. She talks about staying with the shakiness, the practice of remaining present with discomfort, uncertainty, groundlessness, not trying to fix it or escape it or transcend it, simply being with it. This is the opposite of what the Achievement Society teaches. The Achievement Society says, eliminate discomfort, optimize everything, solve all problems. But this approach actually creates more suffering because life is inherently uncertain. Discomfort is inevitable. Problems are endless. The alternative is not to give up on improvement or growth. It's to change your relationship to the process, to stop seeking a final destination where everything is perfect and you are finally enough. To accept that you are enough right now, even in your incompleteness, even in your struggle. This acceptance is not resignation. It's the foundation of genuine transformation. Because when you stop fighting yourself, when you stop trying to force yourself into an ideal image, you create space for authentic growth, not growth as performance improvement, growth as deepening, as integration, as becoming more fully yourself. For David, this looks like gradually allowing himself to acknowledge truths he has been suppressing. He doesn't love architecture the way he thought he did. He loves certain aspects of it, the problem-solving, the collaboration, but he doesn't love the performance, the client meetings, the competitive positioning. He's been doing it because it's prestigious, because he's good at it, because he's invested too much to quit. But what if he allowed himself to want something different, not something more impressive, something more authentic? What if he scaled back, took on fewer projects, made less money, but had more time for things he actually cared about? What if he stopped optimizing his resume and started optimizing his life? These questions don't have simple answers. They require negotiation with practical realities, financial obligations, family needs, professional commitments. You don't just throw everything away in a moment of awakening. That's spiritual bypassing, another form of running away. Real transformation is slower and more complex. It's about gradual alignment, about making small choices that honor your authentic values rather than your adopted ones, about learning to discern the difference between the voice of the persona, which asks, what will they think, and the voice of the authentic self, which asks, what feels true. This discernment is an art, and like any art, it requires practice. The neuroscience of this process is fascinating. When you repeatedly choose authenticity over performance, when you practice being present rather than dissociated, you are actually rewiring your brain. You are weakening the neural pathways associated with the false self and strengthening the pathways associated with authentic engagement. This is neuroplasticity in action. You are not stuck with the brain you have. You can change it through sustained practice. But the key word is sustained. You don't rewire decades of conditioning in a weekend workshop. You do it through daily choices repeated over months and years. The ancient Stoics understood this. Epictetus taught that philosophy is not theoretical knowledge but a daily practice. You don't become wise by reading about wisdom. You become wise by repeatedly choosing wisely, even when it's difficult, even when the old patterns pull you back. This is the long middle of transformation. After the initial insight, after the crack in the persona, comes the patient work of rebuilding yourself on a different foundation, not the foundation of external validation, but the foundation of internal alignment. And here's what you discover in this process. Emptiness transforms. It doesn't disappear, but it changes character. It stops being a void that needs to be filled and becomes a spaciousness that allows for presence. The emptiness you once feared becomes the openness that allows you to be fully here, fully responsive, fully alive. The Zen tradition has a concept called mu, emptiness, nothingness, the void. But mu is not nihilistic. It is the fertile emptiness from which everything arises. It is the blank canvas that allows for creation. It is the silence between notes that makes music possible. When you stop trying to fill the emptiness with achievements, possessions, or identities, you discover that the emptiness itself is not the enemy. The enemy was the story you told about the emptiness, the story that it meant something was wrong with you, that you were failing, that you were not enough. The emptiness simply is, and when you stop fighting it, it becomes peaceful, spacious, free. This is the great paradox. The fullness you were seeking cannot be attained by filling yourself with more. It can only be found by accepting the emptiness, by allowing yourself to rest in the groundless ground of being, by discovering that you don't need to be anyone other than who you are. David begins to experience this in small moments. Walking in the morning before work, he notices the quality of light on the buildings around him. Really notices it, not just as something to incorporate into a design, but as something beautiful in itself. And for a moment, he feels present, not empty, not full, just present. These moments become more frequent, not because his external circumstances have changed dramatically. He's still an architect, still has the same life, but because his relationship to his life has changed. He is no longer performing his life, he is living it. This is awakening, not as a single dramatic event, but as a gradual coming back to yourself, a remembering, a return. And with this return comes something unexpected, compassion. Compassion for yourself first, for all the years you spent trying to be good enough, trying to measure up, trying to fill a void that could never be filled that way. You see how hard you tried, how much you suffered, how lost you were. And instead of judgment, you feel tenderness toward that struggling self. And then, compassion for others, because you realize everyone is struggling with this same existential predicament. Everyone is wearing a persona, hiding a shadow, feeling empty despite their apparent success. The people you envied, the people who seemed to have it all figured out, they're just as lost as you were. They're just better at hiding it. This compassion doesn't make you weak, it makes you connected. It dissolves the isolation of the false self and reveals the shared humanity underneath. You are not alone in your emptiness. You never were. You were just too busy performing to notice that everyone else was performing too. And when you stop performing, you give others permission to stop as well. Authenticity is contagious. Vulnerability creates safety. When you admit you don't have it all figured out, others breathe a sigh of relief and admit they don't either. This is how we begin to heal collectively, not through competing to be more impressive, but through connecting in our shared imperfection. The philosopher Charles Taylor calls this the ethics of authenticity, the idea that you have an ethical obligation to be yourself because your unique perspective and gifts are needed. When you live inauthentically, you deprive the world of something only you can offer. This sounds grandiose, but it's actually quite simple. You don't need to be extraordinary. You just need to be real. And that realness, that willingness to be fully human, fully present, fully yourself, is what the world needs most. Because we don't need more successful people who are dying inside. We need more awake people who are fully alive. So we arrive at the end of our journey. Or perhaps it's more accurate to say, we arrive at the beginning, because the awakening is not an endpoint. It is a doorway, a threshold you cross, not once but continually, Every time you choose authenticity over performance, presence over distraction, truth over comfort. You now understand the architecture of your emptiness. You see how it was built, layer by layer, defense by defense, persona upon persona. You see how the modern world amplified it, how the achievement society weaponized it, how the mimetic desire of social comparison perpetuated it. But more importantly, you understand that the emptiness was never the problem. The problem was your relationship to the emptiness, the stories you told about it, the shame you felt about it, the desperate attempts to fill it, fix it, eliminate it. The emptiness was actually a gift, a message from the depths of your being saying, "Come home, come back to what is true, stop performing and start living." And now you have a choice. You can close this book, turn off this video, return to the performance. You can push the awakening back down, medicate the discomfort. Convince yourself that ignorance was better than knowing. Many people do this. The false self is comfortable, familiar. The truth is destabilizing, demanding, risky. Or you can honor what you now know. You can begin the slow, patient work of alignment, bringing your external life into correspondence with your internal truth. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but gradually, choice by choice, moment by moment. You can practice discernment, learning to distinguish between the voice of the persona and the voice of authenticity, between borrowed desires and genuine longings, between performance and presence. You can cultivate compassion for yourself in your struggle, for others in theirs, for the shared human predicament of consciousness trying to understand itself. You can embrace the emptiness, not as a void to be filled, but as a spaciousness that allows for authentic being, as the fertile ground from which genuine meaning grows. And most importantly, you can remember this. You are not broken. You were never broken. The emptiness you felt was not evidence of your inadequacy. It was evidence of your depth, your sensitivity, your refusal to accept a hollow substitute for genuine aliveness. The emptiness was your soul's way of saying no to a life that was too small for you. And now you get to say yes to something larger. Not larger in the sense of more impressive, more successful, more perfect. Larger in the sense of more real, more honest, more fully inhabited. You get to show up as you actually are, flawed, uncertain, still figuring it out, and discover that this is enough, more than enough. That this is what authentic humanity looks like. The world needs your awakening, not because you will become some enlightened guru, but because you will become more fully yourself, and your presence, authentic, vulnerable, alive, will give others permission to do the same. This is how transformation spreads, not through impressive achievements, but through quiet presence, not through perfect lives, but through real ones. David is learning this, slowly. Some days he feels empty again, and he has to remind himself that this is okay, that emptiness is not failure. Some days he falls back into old patterns of performance, and he has to gently redirect himself toward presence. Some days he doesn't know who he is anymore, and he has to sit with that not knowing rather than rushing to construct a new identity. But more and more, he experiences moments of genuine aliveness, moments where he is not trying to be anyone, not performing any role, simply here, present with his partner, present with his work, present with the mystery of existence itself. These moments are not dramatic. They are not Instagram-worthy. They are quiet, subtle, easy to miss, but they are real, and they are enough. Because this is what it means to be awake, not to transcend the human condition, but to fully inhabit it. Not to escape suffering, but to stop adding unnecessary suffering through resistance. Not to achieve some perfect state, but to accept the imperfect, unfolding, mysterious nature of being alive. You feel empty even when life looks perfect, because perfection was never the point. The point was always presence, authenticity, aliveness, the willingness to be fully here, fully yourself, fully engaged with the raw reality of existence. And the strange, beautiful truth is this: when you stop trying to fill the emptiness, it transforms into fullness. Not the fullness of possessions or achievements or external validation, the fullness of simply being, the fullness of presence, the fullness of life lived from the inside out rather than the outside in. This is available to you right now, not someday when you've achieved more or figured everything out or become enlightened. Right now, in this moment, exactly as you are. The question is, will you allow yourself to receive it? Will you let the persona crack open and reveal what lies beneath? Will you descend into the emptiness and discover it is not empty at all, but full of possibility, spaciousness, freedom? Will you stop running from yourself and finally come home? The ancient teachers across traditions all pointed to this same truth. You are not who you think you are. You are not the story, not the persona, not the collection of achievements and failures. You are the awareness in which all of this arises. And that awareness, that core of being that witnesses everything but is never diminished by anything, is already free, already whole, already complete. You don't need to become anything. You only need to remember what you are. This is the awakening. Not a destination, but a remembering. Not an achievement, but a recognition. Not something you attain, but something you allow. And it begins now, with this breath, with this moment, with the choice to be present rather than performing, authentic rather than acceptable, alive rather than impressive. Welcome home. Welcome to the life that has been waiting for you all along. The life beneath the life, the self beneath the self, the truth that exists when all the stories fall away. You are enough. You have always been enough. And the emptiness you felt was simply the space waiting to be filled, not with more achievements or possessions or validation, but with your own presence, your own authenticity, your own courageous willingness to be fully, completely, unapologetically yourself. May you find the courage to let the false self die. May you find the patience to sit with the emptiness until it transforms. May you find the wisdom to recognize that you are not the persona, not the shadow, not the story, but the vast awareness that holds it all. And may you discover, in that recognition, the freedom that has been yours since the beginning. The journey continues, the awakening deepens, the mystery unfolds, and you, yes you, are invited to participate fully in the extraordinary adventure of being consciously alive. What will you choose?